Elias Thorne was a man who carried yesterday on his shoulders, not just one yesterday, but all of them. He carried the memory of the business he'd failed, a weight that bowed his spine. He carried the sharp words he'd spoken to his father, words he could never take back, a cold stone in his pocket. He carried the day his courage failed, and he didn't ask Clara Morgan to dance, a permanent ache in his heart. His small cottage was a museum of these yesterdays, each room curated with regret. One evening, an old peddler with kind eyes and a worn pack came to his door, seeking shelter from a brewing storm. Grateful for the company, Elias shared his meager supper and inevitably his sorrows. "I am a prisoner of my own history," Elias sighed, staring into the fire. "Every misstep, every failure is a chain I drag behind me. I cannot move forward for the weight of what lies behind." The peddler listened patiently, his gaze thoughtful. As the storm raged outside, he rummaged in his pack and pulled out a simple, beautiful hourglass. The top bulb was full of fine, white sand, but it was blocked by a small, golden latch. "A gift," the peddler said, his voice soft yet clear above the wind. "But you must promise me one thing. Do not turn it until the storm has completely passed and the first true light of dawn touches your window." Elias, intrigued, agreed. He placed the hourglass on his mantle, and they retired for the night. When Elias awoke, the world was washed clean. The storm had gone, and the first brilliant ray of morning sun was streaming through his window, glinting off the hourglass. Remembering his promise, he walked over and gently released the golden latch. The sand began to flow, but it didn't trickle from top to bottom. To Elias' astonishment, it poured out of the glass itself, cascading over the mantelpiece, onto the floor, and forming a growing, shimmering mound of white sand. It was not emptying into the bottom bulb, it was emptying into his house. He watched bewildered as the sand continued to flow, an endless stream. Soon it covered his feet, then his ankles. He realized with a start that this was no ordinary sand. Each grain was a tiny, shimmering moment, a laugh, a tear, a sunset, a spoken word. It was the sand of yesterday. Panic set in. He tried to stop it, to right the glass, to close the latch, but it was frozen. The sand kept pouring, rising to his knees, then his waist. He was going to be buried alive in his own past. He cried out for the peddler, but the man was gone. Only a note remained on the table. "The only way out is through." Terrified, Elias did the only thing he could do. He started to move. He waded through the dense sand, pushing against the weight of 1,000 yesterdays. It was exhausting. Each step was a battle against the memory of his bankruptcy, the shame of his cowardice, the grief of his loss. But a strange thing happened as he struggled. He noticed that the sand behind him, where he had already waded, began to dissolve. It didn't vanish, but it settled, it compacted. It became the foundation beneath his feet. The sand was still rising. He had to keep going. He fought his way to the door, the granules of past failures stinging his eyes. He reached for the handle, yanked the door open, and a great wave of sand poured out of his cottage and into the morning light. He stumbled out after it, gasping for air. He turned back to see the sand finally, mercifully, stop flowing. It lay in a great, smooth mound behind him, no longer a terrifying flood, but simply the ground he stood on. The hourglass was now empty, its purpose fulfilled. Elias looked around. The world was bright and new. The air smelled of rain-washed earth and possibility. He was not buried. He was standing on a new foundation, one built from every single one of his yesterdays. He understood then. The peddler's lesson was not to erase the past, but to prevent it from consuming the present. His failures were not weights to carry. They were lessons that had solidified into experience beneath his feet. His regrets were not prisons. They were the markers showing him where not to go again. He had spent his life trying to carry yesterday, and it had almost suffocated him. The answer was not to carry it, but to build with it, to use it as the solid ground from which to take today's step. Elias Thorne walked away from his cottage that morning a lighter man. He didn't know what he would do next, but for the first time in decades, he was looking at the horizon, not at his feet. He had finally learned the peddler's truth: don't take yesterday into today. Use its sand to build a foundation for tomorrow.